Thank you, Dr. Croker and Dr. Arthur for the introduction. And it's my great honor and a pleasure to share with you my research experience in Taiwan. And it's an interesting and unique experience that I give the talk so late, but it's such an early talk to you in the same time. Okay. Today I'm going to talk about my study on tropical cyclone disturbance and forest ecosystem dynamics over the last 25 to 27 years in Taiwan, particularly from an experimental forest in northeastern Taiwan. Okay, although I haven't been to UK in person, I do have connections through Mary with two people Mary just introduced, Dr. Zhiming Jiang, who is now a full professor and a chairperson in Donghai University in Taiwan, and Zhijie Yang just received his PhD last month, just finished his oral, I think last month or early this month, and still, I think he just left his quarantine today, or just left his quarantine in China today. So it's a good and warm experience to have the chance to give a talk to UK. And today I'm going to go through a brief introduction about the disturbance ecology and about the biased study of cyclone ecology at a global scale, and show you that Taiwan is a hotspot of cyclone disturbance. Then I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the resilience and the resistance, if you may, because some people put resistance as part of the resilience. I'm going to talk about the resilience of Fusan experimental forest to the frequent typhoon disturbance, and then end the talk with the broader implications of my study. Okay, many of you are familiar with the fact that before the middle of the 20th century, many ecologists consider disturbance events as occasional hiccups in the development of communities and ecosystems, meaning that they are annoying, but not fatal, not decisive, not critical in a long-term perspective in particular. However, since the second half of the 20th century, most ecologists agree that disturbance is an integral component of community and ecosystem development that characterize the structure and function of the community and ecosystems we are observing today. So, for example, you would agree that the forests in Kentucky would look very different if there were no fire. Therefore, I think our understanding of an ecosystem, which is important for ecosystem management, our understanding is incomplete without knowing the major disturbance of the system. This is the global distribution of tropical cyclone disturbance between 1989 and 2018. As you can see, Taiwan, you can barely see Taiwan because it's buried right under all the typhoon tracks. Taiwan is in the tropical cyclone basin 3, and here the Caribbean basin is in the basin number 1. And we have more than 2 times the number of tropical cyclones in the Northwest Pacific Ocean relative to compared to the number of hurricanes you have in the Caribbean basin, and the number of major cyclones, which means category 3 or higher. We have proportionally more major typhoons than you have in the Caribbean basin. Okay, so it is not surprising that I study how tropical cyclone affect forest ecosystem, because we often hear that we have to think globally but act locally. And I think that's why many forest ecologists in Kentucky study fire. So I study tropical cyclone impact on forest ecosystems. However, before I go to describe the biased representation, I like to show you this is a typhoon track between 1994 and 2019. You can see that basically the entire island of Taiwan is frequently affected by typhoon disturbance. About 10 years ago, I conducted a very simple survey, but this is the updated version. I type in typhoon and forest and in Google Scholar, and it popped up about 32,000 results. Okay. And then when I do the same for hurricane forest, then there were about 147,000 results. Okay, remember I just described to you that we have 2 times the number of tropical cyclones than you have in the Caribbean Basin, but you have almost 5 times the number of studies on hurricane and forest. Okay, so I think there is clearly a biased representation of global studies on tropical cyclone impact on forest ecosystems. Okay, in addition to this, I found a scary result from this Google Scholar search. Look, the first and the second paper, the first paper about typhoon disturbance is my study. And when I first saw this, I said, I'm pleased, but I'm thinking, is my study so important? So I called a friend in New Hampshire. I said, hi, Matt, please, is your computer on? And he said, yes, please go to Google Scholar and type in typhoon forest. And he said, okay, I did it. What do you want? And I said, tell me, what's the first paper pop up? And he said, oh, it's a study from Japan. So it's not my study, although we type in exactly the same keywords. So my conclusion is that Google is Googling us while we are Googling. And in the 21st century, I think everyone is being watched by Google and all the major internet companies. Okay, I'm going to talk a lot about the resilience of Fusan experimental forest. Fusan experimental forest to typhoon disturbance for the next like 20 or 30 minutes. Okay, this is the Fusan experimental forest, the location in northeastern Taiwan. And most of my study is in the watershed number 1 of the Fusan experimental forest. Fusan experimental forest was established in 1990, and it became the first Taiwan long-term ecological research site since 1992. And it became the first international long-term ecological research site outside the US since 1993, I believe. And the forest is an evergreen hardwood forest dominated by Lauraceae and Fagaceae. And the annual precipitation is nearly 4,000 millimeter. And the annual temperature is 18 degrees. Over the past 60 years, we have on average 1.4 typhoons every year, with about 50% of them major typhoons. So about 0.7 category 3 or higher intensity typhoons. So basically, we have typhoon every year. Okay, let me show you I'll show you the difference in tree mortality of 3 forests around the world in relation to cyclone disturbance. In 1938, before I was born, and before I think all of us were born, there was a hurricane in 1938 in the northeastern United States, which was a category 3 hurricane, and it caused 25 to 75% tree mortality for 70% of the forest on its path. In 1989, Hurricane Hugo passed through Puerto Rico, and in Luquillo experimental forest, it caused 9% of tree uprooting and another 11% bole snapping. So about 20% tree mortality. And it was a category 3 hurricane. In 1994, we had 6 typhoons affected Fusan, with 4 of them category 3. And guess what's the mortality? Okay, we have 1.4% mortality. Okay, I like this slide because I showed this slide the first time in 1997 in Providence, Rhode Island, when I participated in the Ecological Society meeting there. And sitting in the audience was a senior forest ecologist from Puerto Rico. And he studied Hurricane Hugo. So he raised his hand and said, "Are you sure your typhoons are the same as our hurricanes? If they are, how could that be possible? How could your trees survive?" Okay, I like the question, and I will try to provide my answer in just a minute. But let me show you another interesting fact. Okay, Professor Dr. McDowell, his first name was William. Bill McDowell, he studied stream water chemistry there. And this is stream nitrate level before and after Hurricane Hugo. So immediately after Hurricane Hugo, stream water nitrate level elevated about 50 times and gradually returned to pre-Hugo level in about 500 days, in 1.5 years. So about 500 days. In Fusan, in 1996, we had a hurricane, we have a typhoon Herb, which was a category 3 typhoon. And the nitrate level increased dramatically, but also returned to pre-typhoon level quickly. Okay, I forgot to mention that in his year 2000 paper, Dr. McDowell says that the Luquillo experimental forest recover very rapidly in only 1.5 days. But here in Fusan, stream water nitrate returned to pre-typhoon level in 5 days. So if this is fast, I don't know how should we describe this, because it's 2 orders of magnitude faster than what we are seeing at Luquillo. Okay, so why low tree mortality? Why stream nitrate return so quickly? I have 3 possible explanations. The first one is because the trees, the forest have a short stature. The canopy trees of Fusan is about 10 to 12 meters high, compared to more than 20 meters in Northeast America and in Puerto Rico. Okay, so if you don't know how short the stature could contribute to low tree mortality, next time when you have a high wind, when you have hurricane, you go out and stand up and feel the wind, and then you sit down on the ground and feel the wind. You should be able to feel how being short in stature could protect you from being blown away. And second, I think heavy defoliation is another key factor. At Fusan, a typhoon season could cause two-thirds, about 66% of defoliation of the canopy leaves. And imagine yourself during a hurricane again and bring out 6 umbrellas and open them up. Chances are you will be blown away immediately. But if you quickly drop all your umbrella, you probably would survive. And third, because the Fusan and the Taiwan in general has warm temperature and high precipitation, so provide a very favorable growth conditions. So immediately after the typhoon, the plants could grow very rapid. So the recovery process is relatively rapid. Okay, here are 2 fisheye photographs taken immediately before and after a category 3 typhoon Herb I just said. If you look carefully, you will see that almost all the trees survived the typhoon, but the canopy became much open after the typhoons. And by losing lots of the leaves, the trees have lower wind resistance, so they can survive. Okay, not only our nature system adapted to the frequent typhoon disturbance, but our social systems are also adapted to the frequent typhoon disturbance. This is a traditional housing in one of the small islands of Taiwan. the traditional, the Aboriginal people build their house half under the ground. So they also have show statue that will keep them, protect them from the strong wind during typhoon disturbance. And this is the vegetable price before, after the typhoons. Each arrow is one typhoon, and you can see the typhoon often causes in vegetable price, but they return to pre-typhoon level in a matter of several weeks. Due to the rich experience of a government who purchased large vegetables and put them in refrigerator. And when there is a typhoon, the government will release the vegetable. And our farmers learn from the past experience. So the very next day after the typhoon, they would grow fast-growing vegetables so they could make a big fortune. So our society, our social systems, just like our natural systems, have adapted to the frequent typhoon disturbance. So I show you that a typhoon have cause minimum tree mortality, and the ecosystem recovered, stream water chemistry recovered very rapidly. Then does typhoon disturbance play an important role on forest dynamics at Fusan in particular and in Taiwan in general? And my answer is yes. Let me show you. This is a monthly litter fall production and over 20 years period between 1992 and 2012. Okay, all the three largest monthly litter fall productions were associated with category 3 or greater typhoon disturbance. So typhoon caused tremendous production of litter fall, and litter fall production is the transfer of living biomass to dead biomass. So they have important implications on both the net primary productivity and the decomposition of litter fall is the important nutrient and energy source to plants and the soil microorganisms. Okay, so typhoons cause major litter fall, but please also notice that some of the major litter fall productions were not associated with major typhoons, but associated with lighter typhoons, less intense typhoons. And also important is that not all the major typhoons, the red ones, not all the major typhoons like this one and this one, not all of them cause major litter fall production. I think this is important because in Northeastern America and in some parts of the world, typhoons or tropical cyclones are rare. So whenever there is a major catastrophic hurricane, that will attract a lot of scientists to study how that affects the ecosystem. And then we learn so much about it. And then we tend to overgeneralize. We tend to think that that's how a typical typhoon would affect the ecosystem. But if you study long enough over so many typhoons, so many hurricanes, you should know that every typhoon is different. And when we make generalizations, we have to make that with great caution. Okay, this is the start. This I compare the nitrate output to input ratio during typhoon and the non-typhoon period. During non-typhoon period, it's not statistically different from one, meaning the system is very conservative. They just pass whatever they have. So the input is roughly equal to output. But during typhoon period, the output is more than 3 times greater than the input. In other words, the system shift from being very conservative in terms of nitrate budget to very leaky for nitrogen during typhoon period. If global climate change leads to more frequent typhoon or more intense typhoon, that will imply the system may be not just quantitatively, but also qualitatively different from what they are now. Okay, this is my favorite. I've been measuring my lab, not me. My lab has been measuring live area index in Fusan since 1994, 1995. This is a long-term record. If we put a trend, we will see there is a gradual increase of live area index. I like this one because it's a good illustration about the importance of long-term ecological research. Say, for example, a PhD student spent 5 years study measure live area index in this time window, but his or her conclusion will be is most likely that AI fluctuate, but without an obvious temporal pattern, okay, which is true for the 5 years. And then another PhD student study during this period, her or his conclusion might be error AI a lot, but again, without a pronounced temporal pattern. It is only through the long-term observation that we will be able to see how the system change through time. Okay, I deliberately remove the data in 1994 and let me put it back. Okay, remember I said that 1994 we had 6 typhoons with 4 of them major typhoons, and the live area index dropped more than 2/3. Okay, so in the previous slide, this increasing pattern, logical explanation will be that the forest is growing. But if we put the 1994 data back, the explanation is probably more appropriate to say that the forest is recovering from the 1994 typhoon season. So our understanding of the ecosystem dynamics could be very different if we miss the extreme but rare disturbance event, in this case, the 1994 typhoon season. Okay, this is a 25-year record. In year 2015, we have 2 typhoons that create a new high wind record. And again, the live area index dropped to almost 2.9. Okay, the same magnitude as the 1994 typhoon season. So I am thinking if my student, my grand-student, and my grand-grand-student continue the measurement for the next 20, 40, and 60 years, I don't know, maybe we will be able to see a 20-year cyclic change of the canopy live area index. So my point here is our understanding of an ecosystem dynamics largely depend on the time scale we observe the ecosystem. So time scale is critical, and also critical is the rare but extreme disturbance event. Okay, so I have been studying the forest for more than 25 years. I would like to think, how could I put my study into a global picture? Okay, 4 years ago, a paper in Ecology Letters described the relationship between tree diversity, tree height, and environmental harshness. And they proposed an environmental harshness hypothesis. According to the hypothesis, the harsher the environment, the lower the tree diversity, and the shorter the tree height. So because there is a negative relationship between environmental harshness and the tree diversity, and between environmental harshness and the tree height. So the authors claim that we can use the maximum tree height, the alpha, to predict the alpha tree diversity in that paper. Okay, I have a graduate student study tree height and tree DBH from low to high elevation in central Taiwan. And what we found is the number of tree species decrease with elevation. And because higher elevations are harsh in terms of the temperature and the slope and the exposure to constant high winds. So the environment is harsh at higher elevation. So the tree species richness and diversity are lower. Okay, and here another line is from Wuyi Mountain about the same latitude, but in the other side of Taiwan Strait in southeastern China. Okay, they share the same pattern in terms of species richness and diversity, but the tree heights, the canopy tree heights in Taiwan increases with elevation, but decrease with elevation in Wuyi Mountain in China. So my explanation to this unique pattern is that because low elevation forests were more severely affected, were trimmed by the typhoons more severely, so the trees are shorter, whereas the higher elevation forests were less severely affected by typhoons, such that they were able to grow taller. In other words, typhoons, remember I just said that typhoons do not cause high mortality, so all the trees could survive, and so that the tree diversity is higher at lower elevation and lower at higher elevation, but the tree heights increased with the elevation. So environmental harshness is higher at higher elevation, and this is higher elevation. And this higher elevation is too humid in Taiwan, in changing from wet to very wet, okay? And it's harsh in terms of temperature from warm to cold. So higher elevation environment is harsh. But if you look at the maximum tree heights in relation to the environmental harshness, there is no significant relationship. So I published this comment and to say that typhoon disturbance disrupt the relationship between maximum tree heights and species diversity. So there is no relationship between alpha species richness and the maximum tree heights. Okay, one of the very famous hypotheses is in disturbance ecology is the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. According to the hypothesis, when the disturbance is so frequent or so intense, few species could survive, such that biodiversity is low, species richness is low at high disturbance frequency or high disturbance intensity. Remember, I just said that in Taiwan, typhoons cause very low mortality, such that it has very limited impact on species diversity. And the typhoon, I just show you, Taiwan has very frequent typhoon disturbance with disproportional major typhoons. So we have high frequency and high intensity, but the typhoons have limited impact on species diversity. So forests affected by frequent and intense typhoons challenges the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. Another one, according to the theory of gap dynamics, the shared intolerant species require canopy gaps to grow. Without canopy gaps, the understory is it has too limited light availability. They cannot generate. If they generate, they cannot grow. Such that the gaps play an important role in maintaining species diversity in mature forest. However, in Taiwan, because canopy defoliation by typhoons occurs on annual basis, so the difference in light availability between canopy gaps and non-gaps are not as significant. Okay, so we do not observe significant difference in species richness between gaps and non-gaps, and the community structure is actually very similar between canopy gaps and non-gaps. And in fact, in our study, we found that all species in canopy gaps are also observed in non-gaps. And see here, actually non-gaps have more species and a slightly higher diversity. Okay, so in ecosystem, in forest ecosystem, experience frequent typhoon disturbance. And I think it's not limited to typhoon disturbance. Experience frequent defoliation. It could be insect outbreak, or it could be ice storm. Experience frequent canopy defoliation. Then canopy gaps may not be so critical in maintaining species diversity and forest regeneration as a result. I come up with this scale link perspective in my review. Okay, I think this scale link perspective is important because the impact on higher level of organization, such as the community and the ecosystem, the effects are often mediated by low levels of organization. For example, defoliation or bole snapping could directly affect primary productivity and therefore carbon sequestration. But it could also affect that through the impact on seed generation and seedling growth, which then affect species composition and species diversity, and then affect primary productivity and carbon sequestration. I think it's important because the scale link perspective enable or remind us to have a mechanistic understanding of disturbance, tropical cyclone disturbance impact on high level of biological organizations. Okay, then I also try to link my study to the globally most concerned global climate change. And many studies project that as a result of climate change, we might have more frequent, intense tropical cyclones. Okay, I just show you that we have short statue of forest in Taiwan, like Fusan, because taller trees were selectively removed by typhoons. So through time, the forest gets shorter and shorter. This would not be the case in places such as northeastern and United States, where the hurricanes occurred maybe once or twice a century, meaning that the forests have a long period to recover and then further growth after the typhoon. So forest with infrequent cyclone disturbance, this green part is the time required for recovery. After that, they still have time to grow bigger and taller. So the hurricane disturbance would have limited impact on the canopy tree heights. However, if typhoons increase, if tropical cyclones increase in frequency, then the time available for further growth will get shorter and shorter if the frequency gets higher and higher. At some point, the two will overlap, beyond which there would not be sufficient time for the recovery. Then the forest will suffer from dwarfing. Okay, if the frequency does not change, but the intensity increase, then the forest would need longer time to recover. And if the intensity gets stronger and stronger, there will be a point that the two overlap, again, beyond which the forest would not be able to fully recover. And as a result, the forest will become shorter. The worst case scenario is that if both the intensity and the frequency increase, then the dwarfing process will speed up. And this dwarfing have major impact on ecosystem structure and function. If the forests are shorter, then the biomass is lower, so the ability to store carbon is limited. And because shorter forests have less complex structure, and the structural complexity is positively related to species diversity. So a dwarfed forest would, the forest dwarfing caused by tropical cyclones would have major impact on carbon sequestration and biodiversity. Okay, so in conclusion, I think I hope I have convinced you that tropical cyclones play a key role on ecosystem dynamics as the live area index or the little patterns over the last 20 and 25 years. And the second, ecological effect vary considerably among cyclones. Every cyclone is different. And the long-term LAI data, through that data, I hope I can convince you that long-term ecological studies can provide great insights into ecosystem dynamics. And I hope I also show you that the studies, long-term studies of cyclone ecology challenge many ecological theories or hypotheses. And finally, changes in cyclone disturbance regime have major implication on biodiversity and carbon sequestration. Okay, I like this part too. Here is a list of former and present assistant and a student. There are so many students came to my lab. In one way, I help the student to complete their graduate study. But over the long term, I think it is the student who really helped me. So in one way, I help them, but in the long run, I think I get more help, I get more assistance from my student and my assistant. So for that, I am so grateful for all my student and assistant. With that, I will stop and welcome for any comment and questions. Thank you.